Hey, so I'm sure you see the title of this video. Yep, we're really doing this. I'm gonna preface this by saying hear me out. The idea that the Character Encyclopedia is canon and helpful to solving the story is, well, an unpopular stance to say the least. I still remember when, just based off the book leaks, basically everyone in the community went straight to just agreeing to ignore everything in the book. And that's not fair. Rather than reassessing their own theories based off of the official material released, they instead turned towards the official material released and accused it of getting the story wrong. And I'm here to say that they didn't. Not only did they not get it wrong, well, I mean, there's a couple really small errors in the book, but we'll get there. But not only did they not get it wrong, but when you look at this book in conjunction with the series itself and the Ultimate Guide, it kind of reframes a lot of things. Now, I'm sure that at this point in the video, you've seen, well, that this is a part 1, and you've seen the massive video length. This part 1 is going to be going over misconceptions about the story and some timeline errors, but it's also going to have a good amount of my own theories that kind of build off of each other and work with the evidence that I'm given in there. The second video in this little series that I'm doing is going to be about the bite victim in FNaF 4, and while I know that's what a lot of people probably want to know about, I have to set the groundwork first. I've been cooking this theory for about a week, 2 weeks now, and without the proper foundation, it's not going to make any sense. This isn't going to be like a lot of other videos where someone will come in here and say, I changed 1 or 2 small details and now the series is solved. There are a lot more details than 1 or 2. And if you bear with me, if you bear with me, I will explain it to you, because I have evidence. So, while this may be a long video, please just hear me out. Anyways, as for the third video, that's going to be everything else. All of the neat little bits and pieces that I don't really have a theory about, but once you take the Character Encyclopedia as canon, it kind of reframes a bunch of different things or gives additional details on things we didn't really know about before. So without further ado, let's get started. To kick things off, we're going to be talking about FNaF 1 and FNaF 2, and while we're going to be talking about these games a lot throughout this video, there are some things we need to get out of the way right out the gate. Specifically, there are some things we need to get cleared up about the Withered animatronics, about the FNaF 1 location, and about how long the FNaF 2 location actually existed for. The general consensus for FNaF 2 is that it was only open for a few short weeks, because after all, that's what the newspaper says, but what I mean by this is that most people take this a step further. Rather than just thinking that this applies to the reopening that we play during, they seem to think that this refers to the entirety of the FNaF 2 location, as in from the beginning of the phone calls to the end of the game, which is not the case. In fact, this is something that was actually figured out by MatPat very early on, all the way back in like 2015, that most people seem to have forgotten. To make it short, in the beginning of the game, the phone guy welcomes you to your new summer job at the new and improved Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. However, we know this was not recorded recently because at the end of the game, we get a check that's dated for November, which is not a summer month. Not that this should be anything new, as FNaF 1 already set a precedent for pre-recorded phone calls already. However, what does this mean? Well, what we play during FNaF 2 is the reopening of the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza that closed as a result of the investigation, and we'll get into when it closed in a bit, but we're not there yet. Just to hammer this point in further, the phone guy brings up how the recipient of the call is the second person to work as the night guard, with the first swapping to the day shift after finishing his week. With this in mind, this would possibly imply that at the time of the call, the location is only on its second week of being open. Again, bringing up the jump between summer and November, this would be a minimum of around 2 months from late September to November. What this means is that in order for Jeremy to be the aforementioned second security guard, the first would have had to tough through the night shift for that long, which the call heavily implies that he didn't. Additionally, it means that Jeremy did not show up for work during an active investigation, as that would have happened months prior. If you need more evidence for this, look no further than the Save Them minigame. We can get this minigame randomly by dying on any night, but chronologically it would make no sense for this to take place on night 4, when the investigation is first mentioned, as this would be the only minigame in FNaF 2 that would take place in the future. Again, in regards to Jeremy, this would mean that his transfer to the day shift on the last day of the week was entirely a coincidence, with the transferal also being mentioned for the second security guard. This makes even more sense when we consider Fritz Smith, as by the end of the phone calls, the establishment has one more party left. With that in mind, it doesn't make too much sense to go through the effort of hiring a new employee for only one day of work. Not even to mention the Pinkslip's attitude towards him only lasting one day, when if there was only one day left anyways, he still only would have worked one day. So when we tie all this together, this means that the few short weeks is in reference to the grand reopening that was advertised at the beginning of the game. Now that we have that all cleared up, let's talk about the Wizards. There is no way that these can be the same animatronics that we see in FNaF 1, and the games, the Character Encyclopedia, and the Ultimate Guide all back it up. Starting off with the Character Encyclopedia, the book that I'm defending in this video, it repeatedly refers to these animatronics as different versions of the ones that we see in FNaF 1. Additionally, the Ultimate Guide backs this up by saying these look like the animatronics from FNaF, but they're not exactly the same. Check the animatronic inventory for specifics. But, if that's not enough for you, we actually see the FNaF 1 animatronics in this same game during what the Ultimate Guide calls the end-of-night hallucinations. How do we know that these animatronics are our original crew? Well, aside from the pizzeria looking the same as it does in FNaF 1, Bonnie, Chica, and even Golden Freddy look the same as their FNaF 1 counterparts. But let's focus specifically on Chica, as the Character Encyclopedia calls special attention to how Withered Chica looks the most different from our original set of robots. To put it into exact quotes, unlike the other Withered animatronics, Withered Chica looks very different from her counterpart in Five Nights at Freddy's. Her body is less rounded and cuddly, and her beak goes all the way across her face. "Let me show you how to break your face and look like me," she says. Her lower jaw is slack, revealing she has more teeth than regular Chica. God, it's just not right. And if we check the animatronic inventory mentioned in the Ultimate Guide, we find even more evidence for this. Bonnie, Chica, and Freddy all have their appearances in FNaF 2 listed as only minigame and cutscene. As for Foxy, his only appearance is listed as minigame. And if we check Withered Chica, it again highlights the notable differences between her and her FNaF 1 counterpart. But what about the newspaper at the end that said that the old animatronics would be reused for a new location? Simply put, that was never their plan, nor was that what was stated. Keep in mind that a large part of the toy animatronics being integrated into Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was their redesigns, something emphasized by the phone guy.
They tried to remake Foxy, you know? They thought the first one was too scary, so they redesigned them to be more kid-friendly and put them in kids' code.
Again, in regards to the newspaper in question, the line states, "However, the original characters are being kept in hopes of a possible reorganization of the company." Alright, editor's note 1 here. Editor's note. There was only one editor's note. So I made a slight mistake and didn't mention the line regarding the company's plan to reopen someday on a smaller budget. That said, ultimately my point still stands, as the Wizards still have multiple points against them being the FNaF 1 animatronics. On top of that, aside from the end-of-night hallucinations, we have two even bigger pieces of evidence that place the FNaF 1 location as being one of the longest lasting in the series, with it closing roughly sometime around 1993. While I'll cover the timeline more thoroughly later on in the video, the phone guy refers to the animatronics singing the same stupid songs for 20 years and not getting a bath.
The animatronic characters here do get a bit quirky at night, but do I blame them? No. If I were forced to sing those same stupid songs for 20 years and I never got a bath, I'd probably be a bit irritable at night too.
While many dismiss this as an exaggeration, it actually fits rather well with another piece of evidence that we find in the same game. If you check the newspapers that occasionally show up, it says, "After a long struggle to stay in business after the tragedy that took place there many years ago, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza has announced that it will close by year's end." Keep in mind that I do cover the coins that refer to 1983 on them in a bit, but on its own, this heavily implies that the location had the MCI take place prior to the opening of the FNaF 2 location and stayed open all that time. With this all in mind, the location that the CEO planned to reopen couldn't have been the FNaF 1 location if said location ever actually ended up opening due to Fazbear Entertainment's financial struggles at the time. Note that it does not say that the old animatronics are being refurbished for use in a new location, it just says that they are sticking with the original Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Foxy designs rather than continuing with their newer redesigns. This is something that we've even seen in real life with redesign failures such as New Coke or Warner Brothers Lunatics. And how do we know that the Wizards weren't rebuilt? The appearances list in the Character Encyclopedia covers some that were missed in the animatronic inventory. One worth mentioning at the moment, Withered Foxy, who appears in FNaF 3. If you pay close attention to the box in the office that holds the old toy animatronics from FNaF 2, and even the Puppet Pals, you will notice a recognizable arm sticking out. Withered Foxy. Now that we have this all established, we need to talk about everyone's favorite part of the lore, FNaF 4. When the game came out, there was a massive debate over whether it took place in 1987 or 1983, and now we know, based off of both the Ultimate Guide and Scott just confirming it, that it does take place in 1983. However, something that most people haven't considered is the major effects that this has on FNaF 2's story. What am I talking about? None other than the original run of the establishment before it reopened in 1987. Hope you're prepared, because this is where things start getting a little crazy. By now, I'm sure that everyone knows that in FNaF 4 we see 4 toys that appear to be based on the toy animatronics, Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, and Mangle. Something that is less known is that this is backed up to be the toy animatronics by both the Ultimate Guide's animatronic inventory and the Character Encyclopedia. The Ultimate Guide states that the main 3 show up in FNaF 4's minigames, and that Mangle appears in FNaF 4 as well, though it doesn't specify just minigames like the others, likely due to Nightmare Mangle's appearance in the Halloween DLC. That said, the Character Encyclopedia also places these 4 in FNaF 4 as well, further backing this up. Additionally, this is something that Scott has been pointing out ever since the Game Theory livestream, remember? In the FNaF 4 minigame, why would the tiny toy Chica be missing her beak? Because she is just that, a toy of Toy Chica. Additionally, we know that the toy in the girls' room is mangled due to one specific detail, that being the extra endoskeleton head that is iconic to Mangle. In case you're wondering, this was confirmed to be what it was in the Character Encyclopedia, just throwing this out there because I vaguely remember there being some discourse about this back in the day. Now to address the idea that the toy animatronics could have been based on a toy line, a common train of thought to disprove this as evidence. Not only was Mangle not a thing until after the FNaF 2 establishment opened, being a result of the employees giving up on rebuilding the animatronic, but Fazbear Entertainment ran with the idea, marketing as a take-apart, put-back-together-again attraction. And we know that Fazbear Entertainment went full force with this idea, because in FNaF 3 we see an arcade game based on the character. So, with this in mind, the idea that the company would release a toy that you can also take apart and put back together is completely in line with their behavior, and it also explains why the Mangle toy would seemingly be broken in the girls' room. And just to top this off, the newspaper at the end of FNaF 2 doesn't disprove this by referring to them as the new animatronics, because, all things considered, they are the new animatronics. They existed for less than 5 years, were redesigns that strayed from the original looks, and outside of merchandise, only saw a total of maybe a month of total usage. While they aren't new in the sense that they were recently made, they are new in the sense that they are already existing but seen, experienced, or acquired recently or now for the first time, as defined by Oxford Languages. Now, I'm sure some of you see where I'm going with this and have been wondering, hey, what about the Faz tokens? And yeah, that's what we're about to talk about now. Now, in case you're unaware, the Faz tokens were introduced in Help Wanted, and they read, since 1983, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Most take this as a confirmation of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza being established as a chain in 1983, however, for reasons that we've already established, that fundamentally can't work. That would mean that in the same year, we would have a Fredbear's location, toys of the toy animatronics, and that Fazbear Entertainment would already have a television show, potentially 2, at the same time that they found their first location, among other issues. So, what's the solution? The play area. One of the notable additions that the FNaF 2 pizzeria brought was the addition of a play area and a prize counter in the same room as the toys stage. The idea of a play area and a prize counter is standard fare if you've ever been to an arcade or a Chuck E. Cheese. You play to earn tickets, which in turn you use for prizes at the prize counter. While we don't see any arcade games due to the camera angle, we know from FNaF 3 that Fazbear Entertainment made some. Additionally, it would make sense for there to be some off-screen, given that this is the game that introduced the old-school style of minigames to the series. To further back this up, we have seen Faz tokens go by one other name before in the series. Play tokens. So, what does this mean for the timeline? The Faz tokens aren't referencing the creation of the chain itself, but the creation of the FNaF 2 location that brought this staple feature to the company. This not only fits with the timeline that we're creating, with the location for FNaF 2's opening date being in 1983, but also lines up with the introduction of the minigames to the series. And if you need more proof, look no further than at the games that we see in FNaF 3, Mangle's Quest, BB's Air Adventure, Chica's Party, and Stage 01. These first 3 are the most notable, as they not only have clear objectives, like an arcade game, but also feature animatronics from the FNaF 2 location, with the Chica and Chica's Party resembling Toy Chica. Tying into the newspaper at the end of FNaF 2, this would have had to have been made during the FNaF 2 pizzeria's lifespan, as the models would have been scrapped by Fazbear Entertainment until the company's resurgence after Pizzeria Simulator. In case you thought that was all, the Curse of Dreadbear actually brings even more evidence to the table. The Ultimate Guide calls special attention to the FNaF 4 references that can be found in the Curse of Dreadbear, citing Fall Fest 83's year, Dreadbear's minigame correlating to FNaF 4's ending, the gameplay house showing up multiple times, and the masks found in Trick or Treat. Focusing on that last detail, it mentions how the masks look very similar to the ones from the FNaF 4 minigames, but the masks correlate with the animatronics found in the game itself, with these being the Wizards, Mangle, and Balloon Boy. Not only do all of these animatronics show up in FNaF 2, and would have also shown up in the location's debut, but this also ties a link between these masks and the mask that we see in FNaF 4, which takes place in 1983. And given the whole Fall Fest 83 thing, wouldn't you know it, so does this DLC. Which, speaking of, this wraps back around to the second game mode in the DLC, Spooky Mansion, where we find most of the aforementioned FNaF 4 references. This selection holds the Dreadbear minigame and a hallway minigame that features the main 4 Nightmare animatronics in the FNaF 4 Night House, establishing a FNaF 4 link immediately. That said, it's the other 2 minigames that are also of note here, with one being the Trick or Treat game that we just went over, and the other being Build a Mangle, a minigame that features both Mangle and the Freddles. And that's not all, as the other minigames, with the potential exception of the plush babies, all feature animatronics who either literally or thematically relate to FNaF 4, or who would have existed at the time. And who am I referring to? Well, we have Captain Foxy, who is based off of his FNaF 1 model, something we're going to cover in a bit, Jacko, Bonnie, and Chica based off of the FNaF 4 Halloween DLC, and a new Jacko version of Foxy named Grim Foxy. As for the plush babies, the only reason I singled them out is due to the fact that they're plushes. While I'll cover this in a minute, Baby herself should exist by this point. That said, I don't really know if plush versions of Baby would exist by this point, so that's kind of why I'm leaving them in an I don't know area. So now that we've gone over a good amount of evidence for how the FNaF 2 location could have originally opened in 1983, and how the fast tokens could end up working with this, we have yet another interesting thing to go over. Something I'm sure some of you have been thinking about at this point, that being Fredbear's Family Diner. Specifically, how it's referred to in the Night 5 call of FNaF 2, and yes, I actually do have an answer for this as well. Now, hear me out, because this is where we're going to be using the one retcon. Now, in case you don't know about the one retcon, Scott Cawthon made a Reddit post where he said he only added one actual retcon to the series. A retcon being something that goes against rather than adding to existing information. That being said, basically everyone has their own thoughts as to what the retcon is. Though, no matter what you think the retcon is, there are a few criteria that it has to meet. For one, it has to be something that Scott considered to be relatively seamless, meaning that its inclusion didn't cause very many problems to the overall lore and that didn't need much further explanation. Additionally, it has to be something that was decided before FNaF 6 came out. So, what do I think it was? Well, I think that the retcon is that Fredbear's Family Diner was reopened at some point during the early 80s. Allow me to explain. Credit to Reddit user Michael02000, who originally pointed out that in the FNaF 2 Night 5 phone call, the phone guy doesn't actually say it's been closed for years regarding Fredbear's Family Diner. He says it was closed for years.
It was closed for years, though. I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down.
This leaves the potential for either a reopening or a new location, and that was the retcon. Scott never intended to have there be a Fredbear's location outside of the original based off of the phone guy's dialogue. But given this one piece of the line that the phone guy says, the ability to make that the case was a smooth addition that caused very few problems. And how do we know that the 1983 establishment wasn't the original Fredbear's Family Diner? Well, a few reasons. For starters, the original Fredbear has a darker hat and tie, as we have consistently seen since Stage 01, and that we also see in the collectibles found in Security Breach. In fact, speaking of Stage 01, if we compare it to the FNaF 4 location, the order of the animatronics on the stage is actually reversed. Additionally, we know that Charlie was the first to die, with Henry leaving soon after her death. While this is already generally accepted, this places the most likely location of her death as being the original Fredbear's Family Diner. But more than just assuming that, we actually have a decent amount of evidence for it. For one, we learn in FNaF Pizzeria Simulator that Charlie died in an alleyway behind the establishment. Additionally, the building that we play in FNaF Pizzeria Simulator is heavily implied to have originally been Fredbear's Family Diner. Not only does the boxy design of the building match up well with the Take Cake minigame, but Pizzeria Simulator also draws special attention to the building's alleyway, where we get the animatronics for the Salvage minigame. And if that wasn't enough for you, we return to this area in Security Breach, as seen by Candy Cadet being in the area underneath the Pizzaplex, along with there being a cutout of Fredbear in the tunnels where we run from the Mimic. And bringing it all full circle, it is also narratively relevant both to Henry and the series in general that the Pizzeria Simulator location used to be Fredbear's, as it bookends the story with Afton dying where he committed his first murder and the restaurant that started it all. So now that we've got that out of the way, how does Charlie dying outside Fredbear's Family Diner help prove that the Fredbear's we visit in FNAF 4 was a reopening? Well, that's because we don't see the puppet or its gift box anywhere in the FNAF 4 diner, but it would be at the FNAF 2 location, which according to my theory, originally opened for a short time in 1983. To double down on this even further, since the original Fredbear's was the first real establishment aside from the likely Henry-owned Fredbear singing show, it doesn't make any sense for all the merchandise that we see in FNAF 4 to exist yet. In FNAF 4, we see a television show, masks, plushies, and plastic toys. All of this is more than a bit much for a recently opened and locally owned pizza restaurant to produce on its own, but is not out of the question for a relaunched establishment that's a throwback to the franchise's roots, made sometime into Fazbear Entertainment's success. Now, tying this all back into FNAF 2, this would mean that the location that was left to rot took place in roughly the 1970s.
That old restaurant was kind of left to rot for quite a while.
This would also match up well with the time frame given to us in FNAF 1 by the phone guy, where he states that they were forced to sing the same stupid songs for 20 years. This all being said, we are still left with a few key details to iron out. First and foremost is the situation regarding the murders, of which this revised timeline suggests there being a minimum of 3 different MCI-styled events. One for the Wizards that likely took place as the first MCI-style event after Charlie's death, based off of Wizards Chica's line and UCN, one for the toys that took place in the Save Them minigame, and lastly one for the main set of animatronics from FNAF 1. Breaking this down, we can confidently assume that the Wizards were already possessed as a result of the odor that came from the puppet stuffing the bodies into the animatronics. Furthermore, the FNAF 1 animatronics are also fairly clearly possessed. That leaves the less agreed upon point, the toys, who I believe were possessed after the murders seen in the Save Them minigame. In case you're skeptical of this, however, the toy animatronics didn't start becoming hostile towards adults until after the event mentioned in the Night 4 phone call.
There's been somewhat of an investigation going on. We may end up having to close for a few days, I don't know. Someone may have tampered with their facial recognition systems, we're not sure. But the characters have been acting very unusual, almost aggressive toward the staff. They interact with the kids just fine, but when they encounter an adult, they just stare.
Bridging the gap to FNAF 1, something that is often glossed over is that the newspapers in both FNAF 1 and 2 contain statements from the CEO. Most theories that I've seen that cover the owner of these establishments claim that they were both owned by Henry, with the toys being an attempt to make things safer for the customers, and the FNAF 1 location being his last attempt to keep his dream alive. That said, we actually know that it can't be him due to him being the most likely candidate for the original owner of Fredbear's Family Diner. In the Night 5 call that I mentioned earlier, the phone guy mentions how they likely won't be able to contact the original owner since Fredbear's was closed for years.
We're going to try to contact the original restaurant owner. I think the name of the place was Fredbear's Family Diner or something like that. It was closed for years, though. I doubt we'll be able to track anybody down.
This supports the idea that sometime after Charlie's death, Henry took some extended time away from the company. While this alone would only prove that William was in charge during the FNAF 2 location's original run, we can do even better. While the game itself is largely non-canon, we do learn in FNAF World that the original model for what would become Mangle was named Funtime Foxy. In the very next game, however, we also learn that After Robotics, a branch of Fazbear Entertainment, had their own Funtime Foxy for Circus Baby's entertainment and rental. What does this mean? Well, we know that the Funtime animatronics were originally built relatively early on, likely also sometime in the early 80s. That said, I will refrain from giving a concrete date as I can't really be certain other than the fact that it happened fairly early on. That said, Circus Baby's Pizza World was likely scrapped with its animatronics being relocated underground sometime prior to the bite of 83. We can back this up with one of the unused Faz facts from Special Delivery that states some of the first animatronics built by William Afton featured claw mechanisms that were able to hide away items inside them. What does this mean? This means it wasn't too long after Henry left following Charlie's death that William Afton built the Funtime animatronics. Additionally, we know that it took place prior to 1983 due to the underground bunker that would later become Circus Baby's entertainment and rentals being connected to Fredbear's Family Diner. So what does this have to do with a Mangle? I believe that the Funtime Foxy that had become Mangle was a reused concept from Circus Baby's Funtime Foxy pitched to the technicians as a more kid-friendly model for Foxy.
They tried to remake Foxy, you know? They thought the first one was too scary, so they redesigned him to be more kid-friendly and put him in Kids Cove.
Taking this one step further, I believe we can also get a general idea of when Circus Baby's entertainment and rental ended up opening. Some believe that Circus Baby's Pizza World was the follow-up to Freddy's Closure. However, when we look at the line from Hand Unit and Sister Location, it states this.
Due to the massive success, and even more so the unfortunate closing of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, it was clear that the stage was set, no pun intended, for another contender in children's entertainment. Unlike most entertainment venues, our robotic entertainers are rented out for private parties during the day.
This clearly establishes that Hand Unit is not talking about Circus Baby's Pizza World, whose venue was sold, as the canceled due to leaks teaser revealed. Additionally, we can place this sometime after FNaF 1's pizzeria closes, which at minimum takes place in 1993 based off of a few more unused fast facts and special delivery that imply Freddy's to be active to at least 1993. Now, before we continue, I'd like to address the source code from the canceled due to leaks teaser. If anything, it was just too soon for such an ambitious venture. There is still a bright future for Circus Baby, so be watching for her to appear at a neighborhood party near you. This line from the source code reads like a direct comment from Afton in regards to the opening of Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental. Most read this as if it is the last line in the article seen in the canceled due to leaks teaser, but this would directly contradict the last sentence of that article. The line in question reading, "There's no comment yet from the local entrepreneur who financed the venture." This line is likely referring to Afton himself as the entrepreneur rather than some unknown off-screen investor. With this in mind, this already sets a solid jump between the article being published and Afton giving his comment. Additionally, if you need more proof that this statement comes sometime after the initial article in the teaser, look no further than the source code. Just before we see the comment in question, we see lines of "no comment" before we finally get to this quote. And just to confirm that this wasn't something that is normally in the source code, I checked another date for the page in the Wayback Machine, and it lacked these "no comment" lines. Now with that out of the way, on to Michael Afton. Remember when I went over how Circus Baby's Entertainment and Rental most likely couldn't have opened until the FNaF 1 location closed, marking what was at the time the end of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza? Well, this would mean that Michael Afton would not have gotten scooped by Baby by the time of either FNaF 1 or 2. Why do I bring this up? Because this is one of the largest pieces of evidence that people use in order to justify the theory that Michael Afton is who we play as in FNaF 1 and the custom night of FNaF 2. While it doesn't completely disprove this theory, it does poke a decently sized hole into one of the biggest arguments people have for it. Additionally, I've seen multiple people in the community claim that the security logbook, something that I'll go into much more detail on in the next video, proves that Michael Afton is Mike Schmidt, and I just want to explain why it doesn't. First, setting the time period of the book most likely has to take place around either FNaF 3 or Pizzeria Simulator. We can tell this from both the depiction of the FNaF 3 office and from the dabbing chica, dabbing being something that didn't become a trend until the 2010s. Additionally, while the existence of casual bongos and exotic butters essentially confirms that Michael Afton is the book's owner, the only thing we have to tie him to Mike Schmidt is the name Mike found on the book's cover. That being said, however, the name Mike is a known nickname for the name Michael, and without any direct references by Michael to anything specific to FNaF 1, that doesn't really work as evidence. Besides, this wouldn't be the first or last time that seemingly unrelated characters have the same or similar names in the series. Alright, if you made it this far, I want to say thanks. This video took a couple weeks to research, write, and edit, and the next one's gonna be pretty wild. While it may not be the compilation of reveals that this one was, it upends a large amount of fan consensus pretty heavily, so subscribe if you want to be notified when that comes out sometime in the relative near future. Also, before you go, I figured I'd go ahead and toss these out there. One thing that the FNaF community does pretty often is give their theories catchy shorthand nicknames like Molten MCI, Mike Bro, and Stitchline, so given that this video is more of a compilation of smaller theories, I figured I'd give a list of names that follow this general naming convention to make talking about these theories individually a little easier. Keep in mind this doesn't cover all of the theories I mentioned, but just generally some of the more prominent ones that I don't think have existing names. Anyways, that'll be all for now. See you next time when we defend the part of the Character Encyclopedia that the majority of the fan base has the biggest issue with, while I give my own take on what's going on. Alright, see ya.